The warp is capable of twisting and corrupting the material realm, as evidenced by the various demon worlds amongst other things that show the power of the Imperium. However, just as the shape of the warp and its denizens come from the minds of the mortal species, so too can some mortals manipulate and unleash this power in a wide variety of ways. These individuals are renowned, feared, powerful, and unstable in equal measure, at least for the majority of races, and they are probably the highest risk yet most indispensable asset within the Imperium of man. Though their titles and abilities vary from race to race and faction to faction, they are generally referred to as Psykers, and today we shall look at how they function generally, as well as their place within the various groups across the galaxy. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. For the majority of psychic-capable races, a Psyker is defined, rather loosely, as an individual who is both very sensitive to the warp and is capable of channeling its energy. That means little to nothing in a vacuum, so allow me to explain. Almost every sentient species in the galaxy is sensitive to the Imperium to some extent, though the scale of this sensitivity varies. It's common to think of this instead as warp presence, as those most attuned to the warp are also the most capable of affecting it with their emotions. It also defines the extent to which the soul or life energy of the individual or species is visible within the Imperium, if you believe in such a thing. And this is of particular import for demons and chaotic corruption seemingly, as low warp presence implies protection from these things, well, at least in a mental sense. However, a Psyker takes this factor and cranks it to the extreme, and to demonstrate this, an analogy is often made to flames. If one considers the soul of an individual as a flame within the warp, say a candle, the brightness or size of the flame indicates the warp presence of that individual. A Psyker's soul flame is far larger or brighter than those of the rest of their species, and this increased warp sensitivity translates in the ability to harness the warp's power in some form. Of course, not all species are created equal with regards to the warp, and this means that the souls of Psykers from a race already possessing a strong warp affinity are the brightest of all. But I suspect Psykers will always outshine non-Psykers regardless of species. Hypothesis only, I'm afraid. Can't confirm that. The second reason for the flame analogy is because of the side effect of a strong warp presence. It draws the attention of the denizens of the Imperium like moths to a flame. As a result, untrained or unwitting Psykers will often serve as the conduit for demons to enter the material realm, either through possession or the opening of a warp rift. This makes learning to control or retrain one's psychic ability paramount to both the survival and sanity of a Psyker and even of the world they live on, especially amongst races where the trait is far less common, such as humanity. It is through this training that even Psykers of incredible power, those with the brightest of souls and greatest affinity for the Imperium, preserve themselves against demonic attention and harness their abilities for either their own benefit or for that of their species. What is unclear, however, is what makes an individual more warp sensitive than others of their kind, i.e. how a Psyker is made in the first place. It's more than likely a genetic factor, something hard-coded within the individual that makes their warp presence that much stronger, but isolating it and replicating it seems to be impossible for one reason or another, at least as far as I've been able to discern. Taking the example of the Dark Eldar, they're entirely non-psychic for reasons I will explain later, despite being Eldari. Having killed or exiled any of their kin who were Psykers, they may well have bred out psychic potential from their gene pool. Then again, they extensively use growth factors etc. to keep numbers up, and thus any psychic potential may not be present because of that. So maybe there's more to it than simple genetics. Not sure. Damn it, why do you have to ruin science and logic, warp? It is possible to enhance one's psychic potential through both training and technology, with devices collectively known as psychic foci being commonplace. For example, the renowned Emperor's Tarot is a psychic focus that increases the divination ability of any Psyker who uses it, allowing the future to be discerned far better than the Psyker could do alone. And there are many more examples, including staffs, familiars, and much, much more. Conversely, there are of course individuals who are far less sensitive and completely immune to the touch of the warp, akin to empty voids in the soul flame analogy, commonly known as blanks. Most famously, of course, we have the Sisters of Silence. In terms of actual abilities, the powers of a Psyker are diverse indeed, but can be broadly categorized into what are known as disciplines. These are catch-all terms for types of powers, such as telepathic or telekinetic abilities, and in the majority of cases, a Psyker will be a specialist in one discipline. It takes incredible ability and will to become a master of one, so being able to manifest powers from several disciplines is truly a hallmark of a powerful Psyker. However, even the greatest of them are not immune to risks from beyond the veil in the Imperium. When manifesting their abilities, there is always a non-zero risk of a miscast, interference, or a sheer fluke that opens up the Psyker to the perils of the warp. This can range from a minor psychic backlash to memory loss, or even death or possession, especially in the case of sorcerous or demonic rituals. To be clear, sorcery is not psychic abilities. They're not the same, despite what the title of the Chaos Space Marine Psykers would have you believe. Psykers are those naturally attuned to the warp, and thus those able to harness it. Sorcerers use rituals and other bargains, normally with demons, to obtain abilities or summon demons, etc, etc. It's a subtle difference, and you might not always see it, and you certainly wouldn't care when you're facing them on the battlefield, but there is a slight distinction. Within the Imperium, Psykers are still a relatively rare breed of human, and yet they're both the greatest asset and danger to their species. The first known human Psykers are believed to be individuals known as shamans, very powerful but rare individuals capable of reincarnation and very aware of chaos. It is believed, in fact, that these shamans would combine themselves to create the being now known as the Emperor, the only Psyker known present in humanity for millennia to come. It may have been that the odd person here or there had some psychic potential, but it wasn't until much, much later that Psykers would appear en masse, around M22 or so, which is a little odd given that the warp and navigators had been around in humanity's mind for millennia before that, but there you go. Perhaps unsurprisingly, these new Psykers were seen in a wide variety of ways depending on the worlds they appeared on. Some persecuted them as witches, others gave them the freedom to explore their new abilities. Unfortunately, even those non-persecuted Psykers would run into trouble soon enough, though from the source of their power rather than those around them. As we indicated earlier, untrained Psykers are an easy conduit for the warp and its inhabitants to breach the material plane, and the appearance of so many across the galaxy would allow chaos to run amok. Possessions were commonplace, and many human worlds were entirely lost, with only the anti-Psyker worlds avoiding this fate due to their suppression and persecution. Combine this with the warp storms breaking out as Slaanesh began to be formed and the Eldari began to fall, and you get the darkest hour of all human history, known as Old Night or, more commonly, the Age of Strife. Such was the horror of the Age of Strife that it biased humanity against Psykers for the rest of time. At the legendary Council of Nicaea, the horrors of Old Night were used as part of the condemnation of Magnus the Red and his psychic sons. Due to the actions of the anti-Psyker worlds protecting themselves by persecution, such an idea would be replicated throughout the Imperium to an extent, especially these days. We're unsure how the average Psyker was treated in the Great Crusade, but following the proclamation at Nicaea, I don't doubt their standard of living dropped dramatically. Only the specialized astropaths and navigators were permitted to practice their abilities, meaning many would have either gone into hiding or tried to suppress what they could do. Following the outbreak of the Horus Heresy and the War in the Webway, the role of Psykers within the Imperium expanded again. The unspoken sanction enacted by the Sisters of Silence saw 1,000 Psykers sacrificed to power the Golden Throne for a day and free up the Emperor. And following the internment of the Lord of Mankind on the Golden Throne, countless numbers more have been killed to keep the Astronomicon functional and the throne itself working. Such is the fate for the vast majority of human Psykers, gathered up by the infamous black ships of the Astra Telepathica or hunted down by the Inquisition. But for the strongest and most gifted, there is still a larger role to be played. All Psykers found by the Astra Telepathica are brought to the Scholastica Psykana, a huge psychic school-like organization on Terra where they are classified according to ability. Those of a low power level, or those whose character or age makes them hard to mold into a useful asset, are sacrificed to the Golden Throne or are simply lobotomized, whilst those capable enough and or young enough will receive basic training and indoctrination in the organization's headquarters, the Obsidian Keep. After 5 years or so of this, the trainee Psyker is passed on to another Imperial organization to continue their training in a new role. The majority of this contingent, as usual I lack percentages, will become astropaths, forming the vital communication network of the Imperium despite the cost to their body and mind. astropaths are powerful in terms of raw psychic ability, but are weak in terms of resistance to the warp's predation, and so they undergo a ritual known as soul binding to protect themselves from it, linking them with the Emperor himself to make themselves far less susceptible to the Immaterium. However, it isn't perfect. They can still be possessed even if the odds are lower, and their personalities become altered and their senses overload from direct contact with the Lord of Mankind, leaving them blind and potentially sensorily deprived in other areas. Those who are assigned to the Astra Militarum, however, become known as sanctioned Psykers, though rank and role does vary by ability and level of control. The majority, either those without the necessary control or still partway through their training, are known as word-vein Psykers in conclaves called Psyker battle squads, watched over by more experienced overseers Psykers in case of trouble. Alone, these word veins would be a liability, but together their communion is a source of strength, allowing them to strengthen their abilities and even think as one, a true example of a psychic machine being greater than the sum of its parts. Those strong enough will become Primaris Psykers, high-value assets either revered, feared, or reviled by the rest of humanity, most likely a combination of all three. Their power is incredible, especially with the focus of their staffs, but even then a huge amount of fail-safes are in place to protect the Psyker and those around them. The psychic hood contains crystals linked to the Psyker's brain via circuitry, allowing for excess power to be drained, and further neurosurgery doubles both inhibitors and limiters for their abilities, to help keep them safe in concert with all that training. And I have heard tale of the "it's for your own good" bolt round administered by nearby commissars should the warp manage to overpower the Psyker's defense, because it's the Imperium, so of course there is. Finally, a chosen few may be forwarded on to the elite organizations within the Imperium, though very often these are the youngest and the most powerful of the Psykers brought to the Scholastia Psychana. The reason for this is that these elite organizations include the Librarians of the Adeptus Astartes, who can only obviously accept recruits up to a certain age in pretty much every case, but I suspect that older candidates with a great deal of promise and loyalty will be drafted into the Inquisition in some way. However, the first group to get dibs on the whole of the Black Ships is, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Grey Knights, who I won't discuss in full here, as they're worthy of their own log in future. Such has been the arrangement in the Imperium for, one assumes, the past 10 or 11,000 years, and I doubt it's ever going to change, due to both the aggressive and superstitious nature of much of humanity, as well as their admittedly justifiable, given the age of strife, Psyker paranoia. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the forces of chaos have a much freer policy on Psykers than their Imperial counterparts, which is both a good thing and a bad one for those involved. Those Psykers who somehow manage to evade the Black Ships in the Inquisition, either through subterfuge or violence or outright cowardice, become known as rogue Psykers, though this doesn't 100% correlate to being a servant of chaos just yet. For example, the rogue Psykers known as the Apex Twins managed to slaughter the crew of the Black Ship that captured them, and many Inquisitors have also been slain by the two girls over the years, even if they've never openly declared themselves as servants of the ruinous powers. They are classified as Alpha plus Psykers, the most powerful and thus dangerous of all the Psyker classifications on the Imperial Psyker rating system known as the Assignment, supposedly capable of snapping a Titan in half with their powers and usually executed rather than captured. For those curious, an average human with no true psychic power is classed as Rho or Pi, whilst a blank is classed as Omega, and Culex's assassins are Omega minus, and why yes, if you know the ancient Greek alphabet of terror, then you should spot the correlation. However, for those who do serve chaos, sanity usually goes out the metaphorical window completely. The rate of demonic possession amongst these rogue Psykers is probably extremely high, since any restraint or control over their powers has gone the way of their sanity, i.e. out the window, which makes them unpredictable, useful, and insanely dangerous in equal measure. As for the Chaos Space Marines, their Psykers are known as Sorcerers, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a little bit of a weird name, but run with it. First appearing in the Thousand Suns Legion following the burning of Prospero, they are the dark equivalent to the Librarians of the Loyalist Astartes, often selfish madmen obsessed with visions that are apparently impossible to realize. Though they are, I believe, all naturally psychic, the sorcerers will also partake in rituals and demonic pacts to gain even more powers to unleash, and they can even align themselves with one of the Chaos Gods if they wish to. Perhaps more interestingly, there are subclasses of sorcerers specialized in specific roles or tasks within a Chaos Warband, etc., alongside the various disciplines that they can manifest that we might have mentioned earlier. For example, the Heretic branch of sorcerers work alongside warpsmiths, corrupting machinery, bonding demons and metal to form a demon engine, whilst those who manipulate the energies of the warp to their will specialise in something known as ectomancy. If there is a common goal for all sorcerers, it is the quest for knowledge and arcane lore, both for simply knowing everything and to be able to unleash even more powerful psychic abilities. There are so many famous ones amongst this contingent that there are way too many to count. Magnus the Red is technically classed as one, so assumedly all the other demon primarchs are too, as well as Isaac Araman, Typhus, any traitorous artist psyche you've ever heard of, honestly. As for the demonic legions, I'm unsure whether they are technically Psykers, sorcerers, or something else entirely. Many greater demons, and some lesser ones, are capable of unleashing abilities akin to psychic powers, and they are similar to the abilities available to Psykers in their patron god's service. However, this being due to an increased affinity with the warp like other Psykers makes very little sense, as demons are literally made of the stuff of the warp, and isn't ritualistic in the manner of sorcery as far as I can tell. I suppose the best I can say is that the demon Psykers are able to channel and manipulate the warp in a manner that other demons cannot, and the backlash they can suffer from manifesting the abilities, unlike the perils of the warp, is likely to be one of the other gods or powerful demons lashing out or otherwise intervening to screw it up. Probably Khorne or something. His hatred for sorcery is rather renowned. As one might expect for a race as psychically attuned as the Eldari, the proportion of Psykers is higher amongst them than, for example, humanity. In the past, the wraith constructs and other psychically built things served as the entire workforce of Eldari society, and such was the general psychic potential of their race that they were able to form the Chaos God Slaanesh just from their own emotions, well, pretty much. However, following the fall of the Eldar, there were divergent paths taken with regards to Psykers. For the Asuryani, more commonly known as the Craftworld Eldar, the dependence upon Psykers has perhaps only amplified. One of the many paths walked by the Eldar of the Craftworlds, thought by many to be the longest and most dangerous, is known as the Path of the Seer, and all Psykers will walk this path at some time in their lives. Collectively known rather unoriginally as Seers, perhaps the most numerous of them are known as Warlocks, Psykers who have previously walked the path of the warrior and so are capable fighters, and Psykers both. Other Psykers on the path can become Spirit Seers, specialists in spirit stones and wraith constructs who seemingly can bridge the worlds of the living and the dead. Most common on Craftworld Iyanden, they undergo intensive training to ensure their art does not cross over into true necromancy, even if much of the Eldar race sees the use of spirit stones in wraith constructs as exactly that. The other specialist Psyker on the path is the Bone Singer, who also interacts with semi-inanimate objects. They are akin to the architects of the Asuryani, able to manipulate the psychically sensitive material known as wraithbone to either construct or repair various things. However, all these individuals can choose to leave and walk another path at any time, leaving their time as a seer behind. But some individuals become what is known as lost on the path and thus are unable to leave it. They become known as Farseers, the most powerful Psykers of the Eldari race, tasked with guiding their craft world and following the skeins of fate as best they can. The Farseers are masters of divination, but are also capable of manifesting incredible powers as well, such as creating storms of eldritch lightning or crushing the minds of their foes with a thought. As for the Drukhari, however, the Dark Eldar are completely non-psychic. One of very few laws in the Dark City of Commorragh concerns psychic powers. It's illegal to manifest them, and there's a huge amount of caution and fear assigned to Psykers. The reason for this, I believe, is to keep Commorragh safe from the searching, hungry eyes of Slaanesh. The Webway is the place where chaos has the least influence, and if the Dark City falls, then the Drukhari will likely go with it. This in turn means that almost everything in Commorragh is machine-built rather than psychically built by the slaves of the Dark Eldar, though objects of a psychic nature seem to be a bit of a loophole. For example, Lord Hellion Baron Sathanix possesses the bones of a Farseer, which grants him a measure of divination, even if he keeps it a closely guarded secret because it's a massive one-up. What I'm curious about, as I sort of hinted at earlier, is how the Dark Eldar ended up without psychic powers given that they are still Eldari. It may be that the neglect of their abilities in favour of combat skills caused them to atrophy, or it may be that the gene-vat grown warriors cannot have a notable psychic potential, at least not enough to cast any powers. We know some Drukhari such as Adra did see the fall, so it can't simply be that psychic genetics have been bred out if such a thing is even possible, which leaves me with more uncertainty than I'd like in the matter. Ah well. The one exception to the no Psykers in Commorragh rule, as that's what it basically is the Harlequin Shadow Seer, the players of fate in the troops and masks of the servants of Chegarak. Given the Harlequins are often mediators between the craftworlders and the Drakari, as well as the main historians and storytellers in Eldari society, it makes sense that they're accorded a bit more leeway and respect than usual. It may also be that the allegiance of the Harlequins to the Laughing God means that the Dark Eldar consider the Shadowseers as quote-unquote safe Psykers, since Chegarak kind of has the Harlequins back, but I unfortunately have no evidence on this. I'm merely speculating. Though the Eldari, at least at their height, represented a fully psychic race, there is another that can claim something similar even if it isn't 100% accurate. The precise nature of the Tyranid hive mind is a little unclear, but the creatures who act as synaptic linchpins for its will are quite often Psykers in their own right. Though synapse creatures aren't always Psykers, all Psykers are synapse creatures, if that makes sense. It's actually thought that the synaptic aura is a psychic ability in itself, dominating the minds of the lesser organisms and binding them to the hive mind's will. Whether the actual Psykers harness the warp or use something else is a bit less clear. We'll have to find out as time passes. The other, perhaps even less understood psychic power innate to the Tyranids is what is known as the shadow in the warp. Some believe this to be a side effect of the constant communication from the hive mind to the various members of the hive fleet, but its effect is clear and devastating. The shadow in the warp effectively blocks out warp-based communication and hinders warp travel, meaning that a world being approached by a hive fleet won't be able to send out a distress call or be reinforced, and it also impacts the ability of non-Tyranid Psykers to tap into the warp and manifest their own psychic abilities. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this warp blocking also affects demons, either making it harder for them to be summoned or making it easier for them to be banished back to the Imperium. The Genestealer cults also use psychic dominance and communication to their advantage. The hypnotic gaze of a Genestealer is something I believe is never lost across all generations of hybrids, and the brood telepathy shared amongst the members inspires fanatical devotion and, assumedly, helps coordinate the actions of the cult. Though it is not a direct link to the hive mind, since cults can direct to chaos and or never be found by the Tyranids, it is essentially a microscopic version of it, with the Patriarch, Magus, and assumedly the pure strain Genestealers to an extent as the critical synaptic linchpins. Interestingly, at least to me, the shadow in the warp is not confined to messing with the Imperium, as it can affect the Orc Psykers known as weirdboys too. All orcs are psychic to some extent, much like humans, but these ones are much more sensitive to the Wa energy subconsciously generated by all greenskins, which only grows stronger as more and more orcs are present. Such is the power of Wa energy, it can warp reality itself, as it is this concept that makes red ones go faster and makes impossible technologies work through the sheer power of belief. The weirdboys are able to channel this energy into a wide array of psychic abilities, ranging from exploding heads to mass teleportation, but they have little to no control over the amount of energy that they absorb. As a result, many weirdboys are hermits or exiles, too dangerous to be kept around for the majority of the time. There are some that seek this energy out and have a measure of control known as warp heads, but whether the weirdboys are actually warp sensitive or not is a little unclear. The Wa field is not the warp, though it is a psychic field nonetheless, but the shadow in the warp can affect orcs, implying either that the Tyranids can interfere with the Wa field, or that weirdboys have two separate sources of power to draw from. The other two major players in the galaxy are either much less psychic than their counterparts, or are completely non-psychic. The latter of the two are the Necrons, who lost their souls during the biotransference process, and so cannot manifest psychic abilities at all. We do not know if the Necron tier had any psychic potential, though it's never stated they had Psykers during the early exchanges of the War in Heaven before the coming of the Catan. Speaking of the Catan, they're completely non-psychic too. In fact, they were said to be scared of the warp and what it could do, a fear justified when the psychic warriors of the old ones like the Eldari were able to win the War in Heaven. They were also responsible for creating the Pariah, effectively Necron blanks who could disrupt Psykers around them, but as those encounters seem to be human Necron hybrids, I can only assume they showed up only in the modern age. It's a little bit confusing. And finally, we have the Tau. Many would be excused for thinking that Tau have no warp presence or psychic potential, as there are no known or confirmed Psykers amongst either the main empire or the Farsight enclaves. However, this is not the case. Tau have very little warp presence, but it is there. Some claim a biological or chemical reason behind this, but whilst it means there are no known Psyker Tau, they are also much harder to supposedly corrupt by the forces of chaos. Again, this does not mean that Chaos Tau cannot exist, they are simply much rarer than, say, amongst humanity. For example, in the Damocles Gulf Crusade, a member of the Watercast alongside Commander Farsight fell to Tzeentch. Paul Malkiel, as the poor sod was known, play on words, was known to have seemingly performed a ritual that I dare not recite in case of unforeseen consequences, though I would wager he was possessed as opposed to simply a servant. He was able to contort his body to avoid an incoming assault by Astartes, as well as unleash warp fire on them. No regular Chaos cultist could do that, and we've already discussed the low amount of psychic potential that Tau are known to have. Now, I'm not saying Paul Malkiel could not have been a Psyker. Perhaps his servitude to Tzeentch unlocked any psychic inhibitors or otherwise granted him the abilities through ritual, but it's the contortions that make me assume possession. Too many unknowns, honestly. Need more data. As far as the Tau auxiliaries go, we know that Tau are allied with psychic races, most famously the Kroot, who are capable of warp travel and can gain psychic powers by consuming those with powers of their own, such as the Eldari. Less well known are the Nikasar, who were the first race believed to have allied with the Tau. They're nomadic explorers using their psychic powers to pilot the vessels and act as scouts for the fleets of the greater good. As to why basically nobody knows about them, the Tau keep them extremely hidden from anyone concerning the Imperium, because anti-Psyker prejudice is definitely a thing. And there you have it, a semi-detailed look at the concept of Psykers, as well as the various races and their Psykers, or lack of them. Honestly, whilst most in the Imperium are terrified of them, perhaps with good reason, those Psykers who can resist the dangers of the warp are incredibly worthy of respect, both on and off the battlefield. Their abilities are diverse, their power levels range from intriguing to obscene, and I wouldn't like to cross one in combat, even if I have abilities of my own. For now though, we shall move on, as we have another regimental world to go and visit. Since our last stop was a scorchingly hot world like Armageddon, I think I fancy somewhere cold this time. The regiments drawn from this world are renowned, rather like the Mordians, for always holding the line, but rather than the discipline of the Iron Guard, they're simply too tenacious to break, no matter the cost. Thank you all for watching, my name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.